Hello, hello. This is Dana Neeson, again, telesales manager for Tailored Legacy. And today I want to talk about sales resistance and how to avoid it. I think the ultimate goal and what truly makes someone a great salesperson is their ability to lower that wall, lower the sales resistance, which ultimately will prevent you from getting objections at the end of the sales call. And a lot of what people are being taught today, especially in the life insurance space, are ways that just create sales resistance. And then we focus so much on objection handling because what you're taught in your sales presentation actually creates those objections in the first place. So it's kind of like this weird cycle that I'm seeing all the time, where if you just were taught differently in the beginning, on how to avoid that sales resistance, you'll actually get a lot less objections at the end. And the ultimate goal is to get no objections at the end, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? So I have some notes here that I took. If you see me looking down, just because I'm reading and I don't have everything memorized in my head, I like to write everything down first. So first, I just want to talk about like exactly what sales resistance is, because it does come in many different forms. And all sales calls start automatically with some sales resistance, right? You have a salesperson, you have the buyer, the prospect, they automatically want to resist because they don't want to be sold, right? Nobody wants to be sold. Everyone just wants to receive the information and be able to make their own decisions. And, think about this as yourself as a buyer. Nobody wants to be pressured into buying anything until they feel confident and comfortable to do so. So this way of thinking, it automatically has people thinking that we, as the salesperson, we're only in it for ourselves, and that getting the sale is our only objective, right? And it's really not about what this person really might need. That's what 99% of everybody that you get on the phone is automatically thinking, even if they don't subconsciously realize it or they tell you that. Of course, your whole goal in the first few minutes of the call, or if you're in the field of your presentation, is to just lower that resistance. So here are some examples of what people are doing right now that are creating a huge amount of sales resistance. So you're already starting with some amount of sales resistance, then you're going into your sales presentation and creating even more. And the more you create, it's nearly impossible to get back down, right? And that's why you have objection handling, because you're going to get way more objections and much more resistance when you're creating more resistance to begin with. So for example, some of what I'm hearing being taught right now is something like, so on this call today, we're going to figure out if we're a good fit, we're going to figure out if we're a good fit for you. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to make a decision. Now it can be yes, or it can be no, but a decision is going to have to be made. That kind of, I don't want to say crap, but that kind of talk or that type of technique is, it does not work, and it's going to create a huge gap, which you just are not going to be able to recover from. And this type of sales tactic is 100% only focused on you and your agenda, right? Why else would you say it? Because you're trying to box someone into a corner so you ultimately end up with the sale. I mean, that is terrible sales advice. And anyone that's doing it right now, really needs to take a step back and think about why you're doing that in the first place. I mean, if you were on a sales call and you were genuinely interested in a product and learning more about it, and your expectation was that you were going to purchase something, and someone told you, now, before we end this call today, you're going to need to make a decision. I mean, how would that make you feel? Just think about that for a moment. I wouldn't want to buy from that person. That's just going to make me think that, he or she is only in it for themselves. Assumptive language is also something that's still being used today, and it's very old school. And, to be quite frank, people are tired of hearing it. So for example, this is an example of like assumptive language or assumptive closing. You want your son and daughter to have this type of protection, don't you? Or don't you see how this policy makes sense? Or you see how this policy makes sense, right? You don't want to leave your spouse with nothing, right? Or you want to make sure they're protected, right? This is literally putting words into someone's mouth and forcing them to say yes. Because what are they going to say? No, right? I mean, this is almost like dummying the process down just to get someone to agree with you, because you were taught at some point that the more times you can get the customer to say yes, the higher the chance they will say yes to you when you ask for the sale. And I'm telling you right now, it does not work. It's just going to continue to create more and more sales resistance, and you're going to have to go back to objection handling at the end. So you have to remember that when you're the one that says it and the customer doesn't say it, it doesn't mean nearly as much. So let me move on here to the next page of notes that I have. I mean, the majority of calls that have a lot of sales resistance end with, well, I need to think about it, or I need to talk to my kids, or I need to talk to my spouse, or can you just send me something, in the mail or by email, or, this sounds great, but call me next week. All of these things are happening to you because of all those old school sales tactics, which if you just had the right sales skills and just the right sales knowledge of how to address your calls, you would avoid so much of that. Another thing that can cause sales resistance is once you explain how something works, so many people all of a sudden have like diarrhea of the mouth, and they continue to literally talk themselves out of the sale. So what I mean by that is you'll explain some sort of feature or benefit that your policy provides. And instead of pausing or asking a question about how the customer feels about it, you'll just continue to talk about how great you think it is, or you'll give them a story about how it helped someone like a third-party story, which third-party stories are fine when they're appropriate to insert. Which typically isn't at this point. You still need to figure out why it's important to someone else, because if they say it out loud and they tell you that it's important, who else are they actually telling? They're telling themselves. And that's way more powerful than you telling them how you feel about it. So what actually needs to happen is you have to completely detach yourself from any expectations of making a sale. Completely, like 100%. Your only objection, or objective, I should say, should be to uncover your client's needs, their goals, their objectives, and their desires by asking them questions that get them to look at you different. It actually will start to lower that sales resistance gap. So your gap's going to start here. And when you start your call, you're either going to increase that sales resistance, or you're going to ask the type of questions that reduce it, right? And I'm sure more of you are more open to wanting to learn how to reduce that sales pressure. Because once they look at you as the expert, once they look at you as someone different than every other salesperson that's going to be calling them about this, they will open up to you, because you're not playing any games. You're not using the old, feel, felt, found techniques, or every yes leads to, the next yes. Like all those things are, 10, 20, 30 years old, and they just don't work anymore, guys. These people, they will start to tell you exactly why they're in the situation they're in, why they haven't done anything about it to change it. And you'll get them to think about what will happen if they stay in the exact same place and they don't do anything at all, right? They're the ones that are going to tell you because you're asking them the type of questions that allow them to open up to you and answer those questions for themselves. Once you do that, then they're going to be more open to hearing about what you have to say about the policies you have to offer. And they're going to be more open to that because now they feel you're in it for them. So you kind of have to picture in your mind, your sales gap starts here. You have to lower it to the point where you have uncovered a whole lot of information about them. And only when you get to that point can then you start talking about who you are, what you do, and the policy that you have and why, it may or may not be beneficial for them. If you start here and you increase that sales resistance, they're going to be very closed-minded and not open to hearing. Really, they'll listen, but they're really going to hear you. They're just going to wait for you to get to the price, say, thank you, I want to think about it, and then send you on your way. And I know that's not how we want to spend our time, with a bunch of objection handling, going into flight or fight mode, and then trying to overcome objections in a way that's just going to cause someone to cancel, in 10 days from now. So here are some examples of how you should lay out your sales presentation in order to maximize the reduction in sales pressure. So you have to figure out what their current situation is and uncover their mindset by asking questions like, do you currently have anything in place? Have they ever had any insurance in place before? How long have they been without, if that's the case? What happened to that policy? How long have they been searching for? What have they found during their search? And a lot of times when you're asking these initial discovery type questions, because you haven't earned the right to engage with them yet, like they don't fully trust you at this point, they're going to give you very short 1 or 2 word answers, right? So do you currently have anything in place? No. Okay. How long have you been searching? 3 or 4 months. What have you found? Not much. And if you just allow those answers and continue to move on to your next questions, it's actually not going to do you any good anyway. You have to dig deeper. So if someone says, I've been looking for 3 or 4 months and I really haven't found much, you need to ask things like, well, how do you mean? You've been searching for 3 or 4 months. I can't believe you haven't found anything. What do you mean by that? Or they say everything's too expensive. Expensive? What do you mean by expensive? Right? You have to dig deeper, and you'll be surprised when you ask them questions like that. All of a sudden, you're going to open up Pandora's box and they're going to tell you everything that you need to know to understand their current situation and to identify if you can even help them in the first place, because that's why we're here. We're here to be consultants and figure out what we can do, if anything, to help them. Let's see. So if you don't, like I said, if you don't ask those probing questions to get someone to open up, you're going to be missing a huge step. Then you're going to move on and ask questions to get them to think, like, what's prevented you from putting something in place up to this point? How important is it for you to take care of it? How would that make you feel, having something in place? Getting them to picture having that for their family. How would that actually make them feel? That's a really important question, because I've said this before, people make decisions based on emotion and they justify it on logic. So you have to get that emotion out. What are some ways having a policy would actually help you? Right? They're going to tell you why it's important for them to have a policy. And here's a really key question that I think is really critical in the discovery portion of your conversation before you're talking about what you do, who you are, and what you sell. So why is putting something in place so important to you now, though? You see that? You see how I said it, as opposed to, so why is putting something in place important to you now? It's very different. So why is putting something in place, so important to you now? You've been without coverage for this long. Why now? Now they're going to tell you why they want it now. But more importantly, again, when they say that, who are they really telling? themselves. Exactly. All right, so we're going to move on. When you explain a feature and benefit to someone, this is kind of going backwards, but I'm going to give you an actual example now. It needs to be delivered in a very detached way, very neutral and very detached. So you might think a feature or benefit of your life insurance policy is amazing, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you think it's great, if your customer doesn't think it's great, because it's not going to mean anything. So for example, this policy also comes with additional coverage if you were to pass away from an accident. If you were to pass away from an accident, it would double the size of your policy, or it would provide an additional $50,000 to your customer. I mean, isn't that great? Because we don't know how we're going to pass away, and gosh, that's a lot of money. I mean, I think it's so great that our company offers something like that, don't you? And they'll say yeah, and you'll move on, and you really didn't get anywhere with that. So instead, it would be, this policy, it can also include additional coverage if you pass away from an accident. For example, if you do pass away from a car accident, we would pay an additional $50,000 out to your family. Now, do you like the idea of this? You see, and they'll just give me a one-word answer. Yeah, I do. And sometimes if you've done a really good job at developing rapport, they're already going to tell you why. But if they don't, it's really important for you to ask them a question to expand on that. Yeah, that's great. I mean, just curious, why do you feel that way? So now they're going to, every time you ask why questions and probing questions about something you've just said, you want them to tell you why they like it. It is so much more powerful when they tell you why they like something rather than you telling them and them just agreeing. It's like 10 to 1 as far as how powerful that might be. So if you ask these types of questions and you ask them in the right way with the right tonality and remove any expectations that this conversation is going to result in a sale, you will become a sales assassin. So that's it for now. We'll do more next time.